Welcome to Branding the Beltway. I'm Stacey Piper, a 25-year government marketing expert and the host of the podcast that helps you level up your B2G marketing game with actionable insider tips and real-world case studies. If you're in the business of doing business with the government, you're in the right place. Each episode delivers straight-to-the-point strategies from senior marketing leaders familiar with navigating the unique world of GovCon. In each episode, we'll first explore that month's topic on a macro level, talking strategy with CXOs. Then we'll deep dive into the same topic on a micro level, examining the practical approach of development and implementation. We're talking brand awareness, content strategy, and the campaign tactics that actually move the needle. Whether you're a CXO, a growth strategist, or marketing practitioner looking to strengthen your federal position, Branding the Beltway is your essential resource for driving results and winning more contracts. Let's connect strategy to execution and position your brand to win. Welcome to the May episode of Branding the Beltway. I'm your host, Stacey Piper. Today we'll be talking about the mic as a marketing engine, podcasting for brand authority. I'm here with Carolyn Ford, host of the Tech Transforms podcast and Senior Vice President of Global Marketing at Owl Cyber Defense. Owl Cyber Defense helps defense contractors and infrastructure organizations move data securely without ever compromising the network. Carolyn, can you tell us about yourself?
Hi, Stacey. Well, first off, thank you for having me. And I guess I'm going to lead with I'm a podcaster because we're fellow podcasters, right? So podcaster, storyteller, always striving to do better at storytelling. It's harder than you think it should be. I've been in GovCon I was adding up the years. I think it's 16 years now. I started at Raytheon Cyber, and now I'm Senior Vice President at Owl Cyber Defense, and our solutions enable secure collaboration and information sharing.
Excellent. Well, I'm so glad you joined us. And when we first met, I knew that we were destined to talk about this more at some point. So this is great. A reminder to our guests that the first half of the podcast, we will talk about this topic of podcasts. Wow, that sounded weird, right? We'll talk about podcasts from the strategic lens, as if Carolyn's talking to her own executive leadership team and other CXOs of organizations. And then after the break, we will come back and talk about it from a more pragmatic level, as if we're talking to marketing leaders on how to implement this in their organizations. So we'll jump right in.
Okay.
I want to talk about the why, right? A lot of organizations are very excited about podcasts. They're very hip. And I want companies and executives to be clear on the why at the beginning. From a leadership perspective, what role do you think podcasts should play in modern marketing and thought leadership even for technology or professional services brands?
Podcasts are a great brand amplifier. And when I first started podcasting in 2018, they were they were the new thing, right? So I did jump on that bandwagon. And they, especially in GovCon, are an excellent thought leadership platform. And I think you know, Stacey, thought leadership is incredibly important for government agencies, for GovCon 2 government agencies. And that's the strongest place for podcast to fit, is that thought leadership place.
That's good to know. And we'll come back to that, kind of strategic value again later. I'm wondering, to pull on that thread a little bit more right now, though, companies have many ways to invest in thought leadership, right? They can invest in primary research and events and other types of, longer form content. Where would you say podcasts best fit into that marketing mix?
That's a good question. And it's kind of its own beast. And I didn't know this when I first started. But I learned very quickly that the real value of podcasting is, this is going to sound cheesy, it's a community service. It is showing the community that you do business with, that you partner with every day, that you care about what they say, and you're giving them a platform to share what's important to them. So it really is participating in the community and being a service. So it can be a pretty low barrier to entry as far as cost goes. Of course, you can get as expensive as you want, but podcasting, I mean, basically anybody with a voice recorder can start their own podcast now. It's not really very expensive anymore. You don't have to have the really expensive mic or anything like that. So it's that community service piece to show your community that you care about what they think and what they have to say.
I love that. This never came up when we talked before about this kind of, being additive to the industry.
Yeah,
I love that. And I do think that can make podcasts uniquely powerful for building brand authority and building relationships.
that
I know just inviting guests is a great door opener without asking for anything else. You're just offering them a stage,
that's
right?
right. You're not selling anything, you're not asking for anything. You just really want to hear what they have to say. And that is incredibly powerful. And that was the other one of the biggest benefits, which I know we're going to talk about later, that surprised me about podcasting was that relationship building. It's why you and I are connected.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about executives' role and executive visibility because lots of times I know some of my clients they even don't want to be active on social media. They want their EA or someone to post for them on social media, and we always want that authentic executive perspective. So I know that over the years, some of the most successful corporate podcasts feature executives as hosts or regular voices, just like yours does.
Mhm.
So, what should leadership teams think about when deciding whether their own executives should be behind the mic?
Well, the first thing they got to think about is, will the executive commit to it? As you know, it's relentless. To have a successful podcast, you have to be consistent with the content. And when I did my first podcast, I co-hosted, which by the way, I was terrified to do it, to be behind the mic. I did not want to. When I first started the podcast, I was just the person saying we're going to do this. And then I ended up behind the mic, but we'll get to that story later. Um, so I had a VP as my co-host. And what I did and still do just for myself is I block my calendar. There's a couple of hours a week that does not get moved. It is for podcasting. And then in addition to those couple of hours, I have to, schedule other time in. But I would schedule my co-host calendar and my calendar, and that was sacrosanct. We did not move it. So I think co-hosting is really good because that relationship building is really important. And I think that it's good for them to be a guest on the show too. I the companies that I have worked for and want to keep working for, the leaders are thought leaders. And I want them on my podcast to share what they have to say.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned about how you were so skeptical or anxious about getting behind the mic yourself. For
Terrified.
that was the word you used. I was softening it a bit. For execs or even marketers who are intimidated by the microphone, what advice would you give them about being a guest or growing into a host role?
Prepare. So take the time to learn about what your guest cares about. Um, Craft questions that you care about. Because if you're not interested, your audience isn't going to be interested, and it's going to be a really long conversation. or a really short one, either way. Um, but to just try it. Like I said, I was so scared. And my first few podcasts, I don't even want to, they're still out there. You can go listen to them. I hardly say anything. And finally, my co host, after, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 shows, he said, Carolyn, you need to talk more. But I thought, well, nobody wants to hear what I have to say. I don't have anything to contribute to this conversation. And over the years, I've realized we're all just people. We all have questions, and it does feel vulnerable to ask those questions because maybe I'll sound stupid. And sometimes I do, and it's okay. So I guess my advice is be willing to be vulnerable. And like I said, prepare, learn about your guest, find things that interest you, and then you can have a conversation.
I love that you shared your perspective about being vulnerable and being open to sharing your perspective and really seeing it as that community service piece. Because if you take the pressure off being some kind of smooth radio voice, right, then all of a sudden it just becomes a conversation and it can be a lot less intimidating that way.
That's right. I was scared to talk. I was scared to do this today, Stacey. As many podcasts as I've done hundreds. And this still kind of made me sick to my stomach because I'm like, "Ah, I'm supposed to be the authority on this." And then I just have to remind myself, you know what? I'm going to share what I know. I'm going
Yeah.
to share my experience, and that's good because we're all people, and we, like you said, we can all learn from each other.
Yeah, I can't believe that you were scared at all, but it reminds me of like advice I used to get as a child when I would go to compete at something, and my parents would always say, like, go out on stage for a school play, right? They would always say, some butterflies is nervous or is normal, right? Like a little butterflies in your stomach is normal. That means you're excited. And that's good. It keeps us on our toes too, right?
It does. I love that. I'm going to remember that. A few butterflies in my stomach are good because they're there right now.
Yeah. Well, and they're there because you care and you want it to be good and you want to share helpful insights. And so that all comes from a place of wanting to be contributing to the industry and contributing to other people's knowledge. So I think it's important. I wanted to shift gears here and talk a little bit about how we measure this investment and not just see ourselves. And really, I know you know firsthand that the GovTech space has really unique dynamics, like a lot of GovCon, like all the risk adverse, the regulatory and political changes, long sales cycles, et cetera. How does podcasting specifically serve brands operating in that environment?
Well, what you just said, those long sales cycles, podcasting is a really great way to keep your brand top of mind. So, my podcast is my podcast. It's sponsored by my company, Owl Cyber Defense, and I do that for a very specific reason. um, because I want government leaders to be able to come onto the podcast. And when it's a vendor podcast, it makes it harder for government leaders to come on. But since it's my podcast, um, it removed that barrier. So Owl Cyber Defense sponsors the podcast. Their logos on my YouTube videos. I mentioned them at the beginning and on the break. So that keeps the 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 name top of mind, advertising basically. My content, I mentioned before, you have to be relentless to have a successful podcast. So I do regular content. We drop regular episodes twice a month is our cadence. And I have regular listeners and hundreds of listeners every month that our brand is staying top of mind. So going back to that community service piece too, government buyers, they're different than B2B. don't want to be sold to. I guess that's true in B2B too. Nobody wants to be sold to, right? So this also tells them that OWL cares about them. They are willing to invest in their education, which listening to the podcast gives them knowledge about different solutions and innovations, but then also giving them, the government leaders, a platform to share what they're passionate about. So there's also the range of guests and that relationship building. And I've talked to Pulitzer Prize winning authors. I've talked to generals, CIOs of agencies, to implementers across the board. So that's strong relationship building. And they all are associating it on some level with my company's brand. And so it definitely drives that brand awareness. But then there's also, measuring value beyond the downloads. That's a different. So there's the brand awareness, but then if you want to go beyond the downloads, the relationship building is the number one ROI for me. I also I do track the downloads, but the downloads, Stacey, they're an indicator, but you can't tell a lot off of them because podcasts are free. People don't have to give you their information to listen to the podcasts. Yeah, and you didn't, right? You don't even know how long they actually listen. A download could be 10 seconds, and then that counts as a listen. So it's an indicator. The things that really matter to me are the audience growth and expansion. Again, that's elevating that brand awareness. The guest diversity and the high value guests. And when I say high value, I don't just mean the CIO of some agency. The practitioners are incredibly powerful too. And the listeners to Tech Transforms want to hear from them too. So those are the ways that I determine, is this podcast successful or not? And it's still hard. I mean, I still report on downloads and listens.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you kind of addressed that head on, because I was going to ask, because, when things cost money and take time, execs always want to know, like, how many leads do we get from that? And do those leads convert? And it's like, well, this isn't necessarily lead gen because there's no gated form to get to the podcast.
That's right. There's no leads. This is 100% pure play brand awareness for OWL. And like I said, it's a pretty low cost to them too, but they've got me that I'm willing to commit to doing this.
Well, before we take a break, I wanted to just ask one last question before our CXOs drop the line here. And if a CXO came to you tomorrow and said, I want to start a podcast, what's the single most important thing you'd say to them?
Pick a topic, pick a focus that you care about, and you get a champion that is committed. If you don't care about it, you won't keep doing it. If you don't have a champion that has got some relentless commitment, your podcast will be in the 85th percentile of all other podcasts that dies on the vine.
Excellent. Good advice. All right. Stay tuned for our message from our sponsor, and we'll be back to look at this from a more tactical lens. This episode of Branding the Beltway is brought to you by Piper Strategies and Orange Slices. Piper Strategies, marketing that moves the needle. Piper Strategies is a full-service creative agency for leaders serious about growth. We decode the complex, translating mission-driven work into clear, compelling narratives. Our clients expand their reach, communicate with impact, and earn trust in competitive markets so they can win more work. We don't just deliver results, we build your internal marketing muscle. With Piper Strategies, clients grow with us until they outgrow us. It's a partnership-first, un-agency approach that not only gets you noticed and builds credibility, but also scales your brand and your team. Learn more at piperstrategies.com. Orange Slices, fresh intelligence for B2G success. Cut through the noise with Orange Slices, a trusted source for public sector insights, teaming opportunities, and procurement intel. With a playful name and a powerful platform, they're serious about making data accessible and usable so the entire GovCon community can thrive. For resources, visit orangeslices.ai. Welcome back. I'm with Carolyn Ford, and we're talking about how to utilize podcasts to increase your company's brand authority. Carolyn, now we have the government marketers on the line, and we want to talk to them from the operational lens on how to implement a podcast at their company, or maybe a personal podcast that their company could sponsor, like you and Owl Defense. Think about getting started without overcomplicating it. You mentioned anyone with a voice recorder could start a podcast. So for marketing teams thinking about launching a podcast, what's the best place to start?
I'm going to say the same thing for the marketing teams that I would give to the CXO advice is you have to choose something that you care about, that you're interested in. Because if you don't, it can become a slog, even when it's something that you love. Like, Stacey, it's relentless. Whenever you have to do anything on repeat, which podcasting is, it's a lot. So first of all, you've got to get that commitment that you're going to do it. You got to find your champion, your host that's passionate about it, and be really intentional about what you're trying to accomplish with your podcast. When I started Tech Transforms, I'm a nerd. I love technology. I thrill at the possible destruction it holds for us and the possibilities that it holds for us both. And so I knew that I wanted to talk to government leaders because they are in a position, government technology leaders, because I feel like they're in the strongest position to make a difference with technology. So I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And then identify what success is going to look like for you. And I shared a little bit of that. When you're reporting up, your leadership's going to want to know, you said how many leads? Well, 0. So you've got to approach it from your brand awareness lens, and it's brand awareness. How many listens? And set your goal. But then also, what are the other, what else does success look like for you? For me, it was diverse voices, because I think the more diversity we have, the stronger that we are. And it takes all of us to change the world. And I want to talk about that on the podcast. So I also, I wanted to tell good stories. And at first, you're going to laugh, Stacey, but when I first started podcasting, I would just invite guests and I didn't send them any questions. I didn't write any questions. I'm like, we're just going to talk like two people having coffee. And we did that for a while. I had General Stanley McChrystal come on my podcast with no questions in front of him. And he did. He just talked to me for like an hour.
Wow. That is daring.
No, it's stupid. Don't do that. Do your topic research. Do your guest research. My podcasting now has evolved to a much stronger place, better storytelling. I'm listening to other people's podcasts. I get ideas from them. I listen to Branding the Beltway and how you pause to give your sponsor a moment in the middle of the podcast. I was like, oh, yeah, we should do that too.
That's great. Well, and it's interesting because the I have also been on a podcast that was off camera. It was just a voice podcast,
Hmm.
and I was a guest. I think I was doing it before I started hosting Branding the Beltway, and I had to submit a script. And I was not the only guest because it was
As the
conversation.
guest?
Yep.
Oh,
And but then what I did is I ended up reading from my script.
yeah.
And it was my single worst interview ever
Mm.
because I was like tied to it. So it is like a curious balance of being prepared and
Hmm.
like having done the research and thought about it, but not being so rehearsed.
Rigid.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I agree. When you're too scripted, it comes off as really stilted. But if you haven't done your research, yeah, there's definitely it's a dance. I agree. Yeah.
absolutely. So getting back to the getting started, what early decisions around format or production or strategy can really help a marketer set it up for success?
I would go join maybe a Discord community. There are podcasting communities that share best practices and just do some research on what are the best practices and look for what you want in a platform. Like whatever platform you guys use, I wish I were using it because yours just does video and mine doesn't. So the way I do mine is I record it on Teams and then we take the video, edit it, and push it out to YouTube. And then the audio I push out from, I use Fireside is the platform. Um, and I've made some mistakes along the way. I actually switched platforms. And when I did that, I lost my original audience buildup. I didn't know that was going to happen. So go join some of these podcasting communities. And there are podcasting not agencies, well, yeah, agencies that offer tips. John Gilroy has his own podcast, and I feel like he shares best practices and maybe even does a webinar. But go go do the research, find the best practices first of all, and then pick your podcasting platform and all the logistics. And then also, just you got to be realistic about the kind of time commitment they take. Per episode, I'm into an episode about 15 to 20 hours per episode. And I've had enough people ask me, "Oh, how do I get my own podcast started?" that I actually made a list, Stacey. And I don't know if you share with your audience. Like I'm scanning my list right now of what it takes to set up a podcast, and this is how I know it's 15 to 20 hours. And I'm happy to share that with everybody, like all the different things that go into this, because it's not just 1 hour to record the show, as you know.
Oh yeah, I would love to share that. So we can talk after, so that we can make it available.
Absolutely.
So the other thing I just wanted to highlight that you said was about this kind of commitment and the repetition of it, because it is just like when you commit as a company to publishing a newsletter or having a regular cadence on your blog, it does get to be, it needs the same kind of operational hygiene that you have for those kinds of things. Because you can't say you're going to have a weekly or monthly newsletter and then not send it.
That's right.
And it's the same for a podcast. And so that's a good reminder about the dedication and commitment to it.
Hmm. Yeah. And your listeners, you'll lose your listeners. If you don't publish that consistent content, your listeners forget about you. And I mean, it would be better if I could drop an episode every single week. I don't have that much time because just my time alone. So I outsource, um, I get help from an
Mhm.
agency to help me produce it, even schedule it, even source guests. Like I said, I used to do all the things myself, but even just the things that I do myself, which I still communicate with my guests one on one. I do a lot of the guest outreach myself. Um, and coordinate the calendars. I like to do the guest research because, like I said, if the questions aren't interesting to me, then my brain tunes out during the conversation, and then that's no good. So I do that research and I do the questions myself. Man, AI has been a game changer for that part of it. It's also kind of a wicked little trap because it gets things wrong. And so I have fallen into the trap of just sending stuff without enough discipline around checking it. So I'm really careful. And even when I share with my guests, I tell them, hey, AI helped me build this. Please check it. Please make sure your title's right.
Yeah. No, I like that. And it is a lot to manage internally. I'm glad you shared your tips on outsourcing. I also don't even have a full sense of what it would take to do it all myself, since our friends at Orange Slices help with the production and dissemination of this podcast.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's all a lot. Like anything we do, right? We have to really be all in. So, you know, I want to talk about making podcasts work harder in your content engine.
Mm.
And, we just talked about all that goes into, the production and the thinking of a podcast. How do marketing teams, how can they repurpose podcast conversations into other content and use it to extend the value of the podcast itself?
Quick hit is record the video. You push that out to YouTube, right? We talked about that. Another quick hit, especially with AI now, is you pull that transcript down and you have AI draft you a blog. Um, you use it for social content. I like to, and this is where I use the agency. They build me a teaser, so a 1 to 2 minute video teaser. And the way my format of my teasers is I've got my guest at the very beginning of the teaser with a like my favorite quote from the show. And then after each show, I record a summary of what the show was. And then that's my video teaser. So I've got that content. Owl puts it out on their page too. I also share that with my guest and I ask them to amplify. So that's the other thing is now I've got my guest associated with my company's name, right? And they're amplifying. And a lot of times you have to ask and remind them, but if you talk to their marketing group, their PR, you give them those creative pieces that they can push out on social. Now you just amplified that. But you slice and dice this content, it's got legs. I also love to come back to my content. I did one of my favorite interviews was with Raven Manuel. So she's the IT director, or she was there. Anyway, we had a conversation, and one of the things that I asked her afterwards was I felt like I was, I don't know, like taking somebody else's place when I went into that museum. And we had this conversation about race and racism. And I was able to go back to that conversation for Juneteenth. I did a post and went back to it. And I've done that when I've interviewed veterans. I'll do a callback to an interview that I've done with veterans. So it's the content. Oh, do you know what else I've done with podcast content? Is I've turned it into a webinar. So sometimes you get somebody that's presenting something, they kind of get technical, and I'll have them give me their slides and I'll match the audio to the slides and then push it out as a webinar.
Oh, that's a good idea. And I've never done a summary on camera,
Mhm.
but I do pull out. So I tend to pull out my 4 best favorite quotes that the guest offered. And
Mhm.
then I issue like one a week during the month the podcast is
Oh.
launched before until I launch the next one.
I like that. See, that's a good idea for me to use.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, like you said, having that guest's personal brand and their organizational affiliation tied to your social posts and resharing and commenting your social posts is really that that's where the value
It's
comes.
powerful,
Hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
And I've had guests that my company would want to get in front of. And at the end of the show, sometimes on camera, sometimes off camera, they'll say, "Hey, if there's anybody at your company that wants to talk, I'm happy to talk." I'm like, "Really? I know they've been trying to get with you guys for a while." And that really has happened. Like, not the objective, like I said, but them offering because I have started this relationship.
It's crazy. And that you can really build relationships that way and like quality relationships. Um, Excellent. So let's talk about the reality of doing this day to day. What does it actually take to operationally sustain a podcast over time?
Yeah. So again, coming back to that minimum, I would say you're into an episode, a 30 to 45-minute episode. You got to know that it's about 10 hours to do that episode. So depending on how many episodes you're going to drop a month, my show, I know that I'm closer to 15 to 20, but part of that is because I do video. So we've got that platform, we've got the video to edit and that platform to push out. So there's that time commitment. The money, honestly, it can be if you have people in-house to do it, then you're looking at time. And then you're looking at the cost of the podcast platform to push everything out, which is not much, like a few $100s a year for the platform. And and that's it. I, like I said, I use an outside agency to help me with the full production of it. They even help me with the strategy. I've gotten them to the point where they're tracking metrics for me. We check in on our goals and all of that, even with strategy and story arcing and everything like that, just because I don't have and when I say my show's about 15 to 20 hours an episode, I'm including all of that to make a really good show. So, did that answer the question?
That did. I think the bottom line is, I think what we're saying here, both the CXO and the marketer, is you have to really be all in
Hmm.
to do this. And I guess the advice would be to, if you wanted to see if you're really all in and have the appetite, maybe you try to find a way to do some content syndication on a third party as a guest,
That's
etc.
right.
And test out what podcasting feels like for you and your organization, um, before, hanging your sign up saying we have a monthly podcast or a
Yeah.
biweekly podcast.
ATARC does. You can buy into their podcast and they'll do a series of like 5 or 6 podcasts. I forget how much. It's not a ton,
Mhm.
but they will help source the guest. Not an advertisement for ATARC, but this is just a way to try it out. Because when you do theirs, you do have to identify a host and you have to meet with ATARC and talk about who you want as a guest. They'll help you source the guest. You can share with them what topics you're looking for. That's how you source the guest. So they're off the top of my head. Um, that's a way to dip your toe into podcasting and see like, am I going to have somebody that will really do this? Finding a host is hard. That's part of why I just host it because I'm committed to it, and finding somebody else to do it, it's a big ask.
Definitely. It is a big ask. Well, so we're out of time. I was just wanted to offer if there was anything I didn't ask you for, the tactical operational lens, if there was anything I didn't ask that you felt like needed to be shared.
The only thing I want to end with is thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I love podcasting. I encourage you to give it a try. If you're not sure, reach out to me. Let's see if we can have one of your leaders come on my podcast because I'm always looking for guests too.
Well, that's a great invitation and a great way to end. And I think that idea that we talked about last about piloting it, on someone else's show, on someone else's dime, what have you, so you don't have to commit to 12 or 26 episodes a year, might be a good kind of first step. So we will be back next month with another topic. Thank you, Carolyn, for joining us. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you, Stacey.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Branding the Beltway. If you're looking for an outsourced marketing partner or fractional marketing leadership who truly gets the GovCon sector, Piper Strategies is the team to know. We're not just here to deliver, we're here to empower. For resources or to inquire, visit piperstrategies.com.